Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. So decent amount of stuff to get through, so let's get into it. The first of this is just there are some new Displates up on the Avatar The Last Airbender official store. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that there is Avatar Karuk here, Kyoshi, Yang Chen, and Roku, as well as a kind of piece that includes all of the avatars together here. You can see this here. Now, all of these are promo images of these characters that we have seen before, but this is the first time we're seeing them in kind of displays properly done like this. So let's take a kind of look at them. So here's the kind of montage piece, just adding all of them together. So it's Aang and the 4 avatars before him. Actually pretty nice. Then you have Karuk on his own here with the kind of background that kind of more fits what's going on. Really cool to just see Karuk getting his own kind of display. Kyoshi here, of course, looks like doing some lava bending and earth bending as well, so that's kind of cool. Yang Chen, again, really cool that she gets her own display here, very nice. And of course, Avatar Roku. Still nothing new on the Korra Displate store, but you know, that's just where we're at these days when it comes to that sort of thing. Again, my usual recommendation with Displates is that I think they are pretty good quality, but always make sure that there is like a 20-30% sale on when you get them. I don't think they're great value at full price, so make sure you're getting probably at least 30-33% off. That's just my recommendation there. They have sales on all the time. Get the ones that you want. This is actually one I kind of have my eye on. I do like the idea of having these this group of past avatars, which is kind of cool. Next, the next Avatar Chibi Mini is out. So of course this was the other reveal. We'll get into some Avatar's Fighters information, Avatar the Fighting Game, in a minute. That was the big reveal. But the other one was that Chibi Minis finally came out, and we saw the first one last Sunday, and then yeah, they did follow it up yesterday, a week later, with the second one. So this is a Scorpion Bee Attack, and yeah, it's another 3-minute one. It continues the trend of there not really being any voice acting or anything like that. This seems to almost be like Be Calm, kind of made into like a short, pretty much, type thing. There's a little bit more going on than just the kind of one scene type thing, so they're kind of expanding it out. There's some fun shots in this overall, in terms of like the characterization, showing off scorpion bees, you know, Appa hiding behind a tree, a little bit of action here, Aang on the air scooter. Zuko does get involved towards the end. Notably there, it is kind of like book 1, of course, as we kind of get towards the end of this. Momo gets involved. It seems kind of fun. As far as we're aware, there are 10 of these. It looks like it's going to be weekly every Sunday, so it gives you a sense for like, yeah, that's going to continue for the rest of the year, and I guess actually shortly into the first half of next year, I guess, to finish up the if that is the schedule. So we'll see if they expand more beyond just like book 1 and 2 and stuff like that. If they go into the kind of later series stuff, like I'm assuming they'll probably try to have a bit of variety. It's one of those things where it's a little bit unfortunate that like there's probably no need for me to make a separate video just going over each of these, because they are very, very basic, but it is fun to see the new kind of clean animation on these, and that they are doing this sort of stuff. I don't think they're maybe promoting them super well, in that like immediately, like I almost forgot that this was a thing after last week, and had to like be like, oh wait, I probably should check that to be aware of it. So there is that. In terms of new preview pages for books, Avatar Paint with Water actually got some new preview pages. We'd already seen like a lot of them, like the idea of like, oh, stuff like this has already been seen before, but these newer ones here they added in at the front, kind of highlighting, I guess, that like they kind of, I guess, have physical copies of this kind of ready to go. It's kind of cool to see the kind of presentation of this, see the brush that you do get with it, show one of the kind of insert pages at the front. But again, it's 11th of October of August 2026. Like, this is nearly a full year away. And I think this speaks to, I think, what some of the publishers are doing here, which is that a lot of them, I think, are making a decision to not really, quote unquote, delay their books, but just not release them when they maybe immediately could. They're choosing to release them more into 2026, where, you know, an August release should hopefully be able to capitalize on the hype leading into the Aang movie build up. You know, we should have a trailer for sure by this point in time. We'll know a lot about the movie at this point. Avatar Studios should be fully up and running, and yeah, having new books like this on the shelves should be kind of cool. And that's why you're beginning to see the schedule for I think kind of mid getting into late 2026 start to kind of fill out with a lot of these kind of extra books. But notably, of course, we haven't yet seen any solicitations for the actual movie tie-in books, which would be October releases. We know they are planned, again from, let me just quickly show this. If you go into I Am Sokka down here, spring 2026 Avatar movie, again, it's been pushed to October, so everything will be pushed. But the movie program includes a junior novel, an 8x8 book, and a step into reading book, a little golden book, and a full color sticker book. And then they note that they have non-movie tie-in books as well, I Am Sokka, and book 2 in the Avatar Bending Academy series, which is actually out next month. Yeah, I will just kind of briefly highlight that as well. Yeah, Bending Academy is under a month away at this point in time. We still don't have any like proper preview pages. They're not promoting it super well, but hey, it is a novel. It's set in the Avatar Zito era. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. I will definitely be covering this when it comes out, but we still have a few weeks to go until that actually comes out. In terms of the next book release, it's going to be next week on October 28th. That is the Legacy of Yang Chen paperback edition. So they've not yet announced a paperback for Reckoning of Roku, but I guess that should be at some point soon. Let me just check. I haven't actually missed anything here. No, Reckoning and Awakening, and there's no paperback for Reckoning yet, but there probably will be one sooner rather than later. The other thing I think we're still waiting for that I'm shocked that we don't have, the description for Awakening of Roku is still generic. We don't really have the proper one. We have the one-line tagline from Randy Rabai on Instagram is where he posted that. But other than that, we actually don't have a clue what the full description for this book is. And we're getting towards the release. Again, it's right at the end of the year, but we're quickly approaching, 2 months to go. And that'll be more like the countdown to like about a month to go to get like preview pages for the book. And then usually the book ends up getting sold maybe like 2 weeks early in certain stores. So like we're not going to be too far away from this book actually kind of being here. So that's an important thing to kind of just note there. Like if you haven't read the first book, I definitely need to do a reread of the first book. And I'll be doing that at some point soon. So just to be aware of that. The final thing I want to get into is Avatar Legends: The Fighting Game. Now, I already covered this as part of the big New York Comic Con kind of like the announcement. This was basically it for that. There has been a leak for this game. Now, it's a weird one here in that like I don't want to even show the leak too much on screen here. I'll just kind of quickly highlight it. It's from Reddit. This is where it was initially posted. Huge leak, full 5-book story plot for the upcoming Avatar fighting game, which is this game. And it just goes into detail on what it is. Here, there's internal sources. This is where it kind of came from. It doesn't really go into a lot of detail on what the stuff is. The underlying leaked stuff has kind of come out there a little bit. So I have context for what this actually is. I would say what's here is ultimately accurate, but it's this post is an AI summary of one of the documents that was actually leaked. So the presentation of this leak from the leaker is kind of on the weak side of things, but the underlying information here is correct, and the leak is like real. If you see the underlying documents, you can see that there's lots of videos in there that kind of prove that it is real, in that like they have concept art feedback for the characters from Avatar Studios. Brand guideline stuff is in there for, again, working with Avatar Studios. There is documents about the story, of course, multiple documents. The leak here on Reddit only really basically summarizes one of those documents and doesn't even cover the full context of that document, which I will actually get into in a moment. So, first of all, I just want to highlight what we have in terms of official information on this game. So, 12 playable characters at launch, many more released via seasonal model. Now, from the leaks, the plan seemed to have been 18 characters initially. In my mind, many more feels like a little bit more than 6, so I'm guessing in the gap between, again, remember, this game was announced before New York Comic Con, like a year beforehand. There wasn't much information published by Maximum Entertainment. It was then cancelled. We didn't hear anything about it for a very long time, and then of course it was picked up again here with this New York Comic Con announcement by Gameplay Group International. So we don't really know what the full situation is behind the scenes in terms of like, was that crossover pretty quick, or was the game like non-existent for a certain amount of time before it was picked up again. The plan initially seemed to have been for a 2025 release. Now it's a summer 2026 release, so it's looking like in or around a year the game has kind of been pushed back because of all the issues, mainly just because it was cancelled for a certain amount of time. But it seems like they're going for roughly a similar idea, a similar amount of characters, but with all the timing and the fact that it's actually now going to release probably in the window of the Aang movie, they might have more characters planned than was in the initial plan for the game, which is kind of interesting. The only other thing I want to mention is that because this is all story spoilers, basically leaks, it is confirmed that the game is going to have a single player campaign that will have an original narrative. Now, the trailer and all the official content that we have doesn't really give you much of a hint of what it actually is. About the only thing you can properly read into from the official material is just that, okay, it's Avatar Legends, so that means the whole franchise is on the table here, not just ATLA. Straight away, Aang and Korra are in the game, meaning at the very least there are 2 eras of the franchise in here. And then if you look at this screenshot here from the trailer, you can see as they kind of introduce that Sokka is going to be a playable character. Look at the stage he's on in the background there. That is the spirit oasis that we see in the beginnings episodes. Now, so those are the specific episodes of Korra where we get introduced to Avatar 1. Now note, Korra never goes to this specific location as such. This is a Wan specific location, which would maybe suggest that there is some Avatar 1 content in the game. Maybe they just like the location, they might have maybe settled on some stuff in the final version of the game, but based on the leaks, Avatar 1 is meant to be in the game. The other era from the leaks that is meant to be in the game is the Avatar Kyoshi era, which I think is really, really fun, that like Kyoshi is being maybe highlighted a lot more. I think that's actually a really good move. And it also fits the idea of, if the game is going to lean into, like the leaks suggest, this multi-era kind of crossover kind of type thing, then yeah, 4 avatars, 1 from each of the nations. You know, Aang for air, Korra for water, Kyoshi for earth, and then Wan is technically a fire avatar because that was his first element. That fits pretty nicely, and they are the 4 probably most notable avatars that we kind of know of right now. Again, that's not saying anything bad about the other avatars. Yang Chen is really, really cool as a character if you've read the novels, and Karuk is kind of fascinating. I hope he gets some novels at some point soon. And even Roku, I'm really eager to see what the second book is like and so on. The other avatars are interesting as well, but these are probably the obvious 4 to actually pick if that's the direction that they're going in. So I'm fascinated to see when they do more marketing for this game, how they go about sort of revealing the details about the game's narrative. Now, just before I dive into the leaks a little bit more, I will just give you sort of what my thoughts were on the game's original story prior to me hearing about the leaks and kind of what it might actually end up being. When I first saw this, and I think I even said this in my New York Comic Con video, my thoughts were that they were either going to do basically what Avatar Realms Collide is doing, which again is kind of doing a multi-era crossover thing, but kind of poorly, where like the characters don't really interact, but It's also really clear it's a non-canon thing, and they're not really trying to maybe do too much with the story, even though they maybe highlighted that initially. Whereas with this game, it seems like they want to try and have an actual story that's maybe a little bit more ambitious, leaning into the kind of crossover. And I think that makes sense as like one of the ways you can go with this, because the only other option was to, if you want to do a canon story, is I think you have to really pull back on the ambition of a canon story for a fighting game and borderline make it a little bit kind of mundane and like not really impactful, because you don't want to have maybe like super important content in a game that maybe not everyone is going to play. And that's the kind of tricky point here, is that, yeah, you don't want to do giant character development that's canonical with these characters. You kind of just want to have a lot of fun with them from a character point of view, which with multiple eras involved, like the Korra characters and the Avatar characters involved, you're probably going to get more value out of that with the clear non-canon setup of the eras kind of crossing over. And I think that actually makes a ton of sense. So, just before we get into any specifics on the leaks as well, I just want to give some key context to what they actually are. As I said, what the Reddit post is it is an AI summary of, I believe it's like a 17-page story summary document from a bunch of leaked information. Now, the other thing that is important to note about this is that this is an incredibly early document in the kind of story planning out process. This is not finalized at all. It seems like Avatar Studios and the devs have gone back a couple of times at this point, but this is basically the first time proper detail is being put to paper effectively on what the story is. The other thing is that this document in the leaks, literally on the side, has notes from Joan Hilty at Avatar Studios and Mike DiMartino, and they give feedback on this document that, you know, the leak itself doesn't actually kind of go into. So the point about that is just that straight away they give kind of, you know, tips and tricks. They basically say this will need to be changed because of this reason, we like this, we don't like this. They're still, you know, going back and forth on the planning stages of this story. So sure, when you actually read even just the Reddit post, the story sounds crazy because it's rather ambitious. And then when I reveal that, like, actually it's a summarized version of a much kind of bigger story setup, it's like, whoa, what are we actually doing here? And it's interesting because one of the points of feedback in the document from like Joan Hilty is basically like, hey, how are you going to do this story? Like, what is the actual, you know, delivery method of the story content within this game? It seems like what you're going to have to do is have a lot of lengthy cutscenes. And given what you're doing with the game really highlighting hand-drawn 2D, if you're going to do cutscenes, the expectation would be that they're 2D animated. And so can you do a lot of lengthy 2D animated cutscenes for this game, given that it doesn't seem to be maybe the most crazy high budget, high production like capacity game? As in, if they're only going for like maybe under 20 characters in the whole game, can they really tell a giant 5-book story that actually is quite sweeping in how kind of crazy it actually is? Because touching on some of the ideas here straight away, like the story setup of like why the eras cross over of this harmonic rift thing, they're going to tie it into basically harmonic convergence, the creation of the Avatar. Vatu's going to be involved in the plot. A brand new powerful spirit, the spirit of impermanence, is going to be involved in the plot. By the end of this plot, the idea seems to be that Vatu will be ripped out of Korra and combine with the version of Vatu that's in the kind of Rift universe, and we'll do this kind of crazy thing with like the 4 avatars from the 4 eras kind of fighting side by side to face off against like Vatu and this other spirit. And then the actual main villain is a Kyoshi era character who is kind of connected to Tagaka, is a Fifth Nation character, but is not Tagaka. So It sounds interesting. Like, I appreciate the ambition of them actually trying to do something interesting. But what's interesting when you read the feedback on this summary is that they do give them kind of feedback that is effectively like, we feel the story feels a little bit conflicted about what it's trying to do. Is it trying to be borderline Avengers Endgame, where like we're really telling a really intricate, detailed story that involves the kind of gimmick of this game of the eras crossing over? Or are you just trying to do a bunch of fun character interactions like Marvel's What If? They literally allude to the idea of, are you trying to do an Avengers Endgame, or are you trying to do a What If? And it seems like the Avatar Studios approach is more like, we feel this would be better done, and it would confuse people less. It would lean more into the brand's approach to how they typically don't want to really do the crossover type thing. But for a game like this, it kind of makes sense to do a bit of that kind of era crossover situation. They want to lean into, it's super clear it's non-canon. And that's the point the whole time through. It's a non-canon story. You shouldn't be viewing any of this kind of crossover stuff, the Rift Dimension stuff, as being anything they're trying to incorporate into canon. The takeaway seems to be that what seemed to spark the excitement on kind of almost both sides of this back and forth was just the idea of the ability to take groups of characters from the different eras and create these kind of unique teams. And the idea would be that as part of the way everything gets mashed together, the different eras of characters get split apart, and so you end up with like, oh, here at one point like Korra meets King Boomy, later on in the story she encounters Azula, that sort of thing. Aang encounters, you know, Kyoshi, and that sort of point, you know. Katara interacts with Mako and Bolin, you know, those type of points. Like, you can see the idea of that's where they kind of want to go with this. Is it feels more like, you know, the kind of Sonic Racing Crossworlds thing from that recent game that's come out. The idea of, you're not trying to tell a giant crazy story because you know it's non-canon going in. So instead, focus on the fun character interactions and have that be the thing that will stand out and get people talking. Whereas I think they kind of point out that this story almost feels a little bit ambitious, especially given that I'm not particularly sure on what the scope of the game is from an ambition point of view. I don't think it's going to be like Quest for Balance level, but I'm not sure we're talking AAA game here. So pulling back on the ambition of the story is something that I think they might need to do. Because again, one of the other key points of feedback is just that, like, I think in the end, they kind of feel that the story gets almost a little bit too technical, into the weeds, about almost really exploring the era crossover thing, rather than just the rift being a way to just explain why the characters have crossed over. Yes, you'll have to resolve that in the end to reverse it as part of whatever story it is. But in their mind, I think Avatar Studios wants that to just be sort of like, yeah, just get to the character interactions as soon as possible, make it super clear it's something crazy as part of this alternate universe type situation. It's nothing to do with canon, and pull back on maybe overly trying to play with borderline the time travel mechanics of the characters from the Korra era would know stuff that is still to happen in the Avatar, in the Aang era, and so on. Play more into just the fun factor of these characters interacting together. That's the takeaway that I have on it. So I really don't want to go into the specifics of the leak, just because I'd be shocked if too much of it makes it through to the final game. My guess is that they will keep some element of, like, yeah, harmonic rift, like something creates a tear in the fabric of reality, and that's why the crossover happens. They want to have some sort of a story premise for why that happens. Will they go into detail on explaining that it relates to the whole Avatar 1 thing? Maybe a little bit. I think they maybe seem to like the idea of the spirit kind of manipulating people, and specifically having a Kyoshi era character to be the villain. I actually think that is a good move if you really want to do stuff with the Kyoshi era, given that it doesn't maybe seem like they're going to use a lot of characters from the Kyoshi era. Then yeah, Kyoshi herself plus an original villain is actually a nice way to do it. And then maybe who knows, maybe something has changed, maybe they can add Rangi in, that would be kind of cool, but it looks like they're maybe going for kind of older Kyoshi, and they potentially don't want to kind of mess with the idea of like, we only really know like kind of teenage Rangi, so there's that sort of situation here as well that you're kind of dealing with. Not to mention, you don't want to kind of get bogged down with references to publishing in what is meant to be a sort of like fun fighting game story in between fights, rather than them really trying to make something huge out of the story. That'd be kind of my general thoughts on it. There's even feedback about, like, say, like Zahir is one of the characters who's going to get kind of pulled into the crossover. They give feedback later on in the story that, like, yeah, this seems like it gets a little bit too focused on Zahir. There's other characters involved in this story, as in, like, the reason I don't think a lot of this is going to happen is just because, yeah, this is a story premise kind of almost written in a vacuum that hasn't yet, or is in the process of undergoing feedback. I think a lot of changes are going to be made to almost just simplify it down. Some of these elements I think will stay in place, but I can't see it being as maybe broad in scope as this. We might see some of the same pairings of characters end up happening in the actual game, because it does seem like they've maybe committed to maybe what the character roster actually is. But again, I will leave that to you to, I'll link this leak on Reddit down below. You'll have to find the other material yourself, but I feel I've done a decent job of giving you just a little bit more context to this, of like, hey, this sounds crazy, but then you realize that it's like a super early document, and there's likely a million back and forths that happen after this amount of information that changes the story. And there's even one document that kind of almost alludes to the idea that, you know, they maybe have enough things where like they feel like it needs to be changed, that they might heavily change the story, not just bits and pieces, but like they might actually just full on pull out whole chunks of this story and change the premise. But the one takeaway does seem to be, though, that Avatar Studios, when given a pitch for 3 separate stories, went for the kind of multiverse one. They went for the multi-era storytelling one over something that would come across more as a kind of proper canonical addition to lore, giving me the impression that, yeah, they didn't really want to deal with too much with having to make a canon story in the fighting game, so they just wanted to have kind of fun with it. It gives them a little bit more leeway, and it probably gives the devs a little bit more kind of leeway to work with as well, where one of the premise of the Rift is that because it's literally all of the eras stacked on top of each other effectively, it means that like they can just pick and mix and match basically locations from all the eras, and you don't have to worry too much about swapping between eras, because the idea is that it's everything together in this kind of Rift world. So yeah, that's it for some talk on the leaks. I really don't think there's too much value in trying to pick apart what the story was, because it won't be there in that way in the final version. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on everything we talked about here. The new displates with the past avatars, the new Chibi mini, any thoughts on any of the kind of publishing stuff that we're waiting for more recently, and of course the leaks as well. But otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.